Tara Brown and the Swinging London Colour Revolution by Vic Jenham, Chapter 4, Part 1. To cheer everyone up, Mummy had the grand idea of moving us all to Paris, to help Miguel pursue his desired career as a fashion designer, and also to escape the prying eyes of Ireland's finest, who in their majority couldn't understand what their beloved Una saw in this third-rate tailor who clearly lacked the intellectual ability and education to take part in their fabulous conversation. As was our wont, midnight ideas were acted upon immediately, and so within a week our party of 3 set off to the City of Lights. Mummy's informers had found us a flat at Rue de l'Université, just off the south bank of the River Seine, between Invalides and Champ de Mars. I was positively excited about our move, even if it was in the wrong direction. City life is what I needed. I had known Lugala all my life, and with my age improving, I was in need of moving on to stonier pastures, and London wasn't far away. I could hop over for a weekend as often as I wanted. I knew London from regular visits and liked how it was vast and dirty, the complete opposite of Lugala. Paris was supposed to be good-looking, and indeed it was. It had its own dirt to carry, but it was beautifully made. I especially liked how the buildings were all the same height and style, like rows of soldiers, the city a giant encampment. Napoleon at Waterloo. The only downside I could think of was that living in an apartment instead of on an estate meant feeling Miguel's presence much more. It was easy to pick up an interest in architecture while in Paris. I asked Mummy darling how they'd done it, the Parisians, to get their city so egalitarian. She said she'd heard about the story, but that she would surely find a connoisseur to fill me in on the details if I went along. I accepted her proposal without delay. I loved learning, as long as it was only me. I didn't want to wait, see? My friends, they were sweet and they were fun, but they didn't know a thing. Not about art or philosophy or politics or life as some people manage to live it. I was thrown into this life for free and could not forsake my good fortune by living a common existence. That somehow seemed cruel. I got to know about Baron Haussmann and how the city was indeed rebuilt in record time during the second half of the 19th century. How could people work so hard? I wondered. They must have been rich and hired many hands, said my impeccable English-speaking local art teacher. An existentialist by looks, but not half as radical when he spoke. Mummy darling adored Jean-Pierre, and I had fun sharing a bottle of wine with him, which he, after initial hesitance, accepted. All the while, I was listening carefully. They should have done the same to London, I remarked. It might not have been bombed by the Germans either. Oh, but they did, said Jean-Pierre. After the Great Fire of 1666, London was rebuilt according to Masonic street patterns, just as later happened in Washington in the United States. It must have been the times, or perhaps British mentality, but private owners were invited to build on their own lots, so the city is a bit of everything. I still thought they could have done it to London a second time, and then we let the topic rest. It was also the end of my classes. Jean-Pierre was now teaching Mummy darling some tricks. I was 14 when we moved to Paris and in possession of a secret agreement to be of importance to the new decade. Time to declare myself a young adult and stop listening to anybody advising me what to do if I hadn't agreed on the matter myself already. That included Mummy darling, who still had a lot of influence on me due to her sponsoring my budgetary affairs. To be exact, there was a family trust which would pour some cash on me on a regular basis. But it was my mother who shielded my money from me. I had to ask her permission for every purchase I needed to make. Luckily, she always said yes. Some people blamed this on her weakness for me. I blamed it on my strength in seduction. Nevertheless, she held the key, and I was just a smooth talker. And boy, did I need my persuasion skills to get my own life going in the City of Lights. I had nothing with me. I needed everything, and everything was new, so I needed to talk her out of a lot of money. She was spending lavishly on Miguel, so she had an extra argument to give in. And I made her give. I needed to check out the city and become part of it. I needed things. By the way, the whole City of Lights thing is somewhat exaggerated. Paris was well lit, but in no way exceptional for the way it is built. When you concentrate people, and Paris does this, you concentrate electricity use, and this will show in the amount of light on the streets. The main streets of central London are the same. It's just there seem to be more unlit alleys over there. All in, Paris was a fantastic city for a young man like me, full of fun and beauty and serious convictions that needed long speeches to be fully understood by the speakers themselves. People spoke a lot about Sartre and the recently deceased Albert Camus, inviting me to read some of their novels in translation. I gave in and read The Plague, which I found scary and mesmerizing. I also tried Nausea, yet the character's boredom didn't appeal to me, and I put the book aside well before finishing it. I liked the fashion of existentialism, though. It was simple and office-like, but the all black gave it a uniform quality. They were like an army. They were everywhere. They liked cool jazz and America-inspired French pop songs, and I was totally on the same wavelength with them musically. There were lots of cool places to go to. I also went to see the film sensation everyone was talking about, A Bout de Souffle, with Jean-Paul Belmondo and Gene Seberg. I watched it 5 times, trying to get what they were saying, and then I watched it with English subtitles in a small theater in the Sorbonne district. I didn't care much for the story, but I liked the style and understood why everybody was ecstatic about it. Smoking was an obligation in Paris. I was full on into menthol cigarettes. After my intent to quit had stopped short of putting my cigarette where my mouth was, I had followed a friend's advice to take up menthols. I liked them immediately. They brushed away the dirt of smoke as long as you kept smoking, and I was easily putting away a packet a day. The stench came only the next morning and was calculated. Lots of fruit juice and an early vodka would usually do the trick. We were basically drinking all day, Mummy Darling and me and Miguel when he was around. Yet never too fast. We abhorred drunken behavior. We were way too cool for that. We were the Guinness family. I was really getting into American music now. I had bought a portable sound system, a beautiful box gramophone which used an awful lot of batteries. I took it everywhere in the lovely Paris spring, listening to Elvis, the Drifters, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, and French sensation Johnny Hallyday. I even liked Dalida, though mostly for her looks. I often went to Invalides, sitting in the sun on the quickly drying grass and playing my records. I wouldn't stay unnoticed for long. On my 3rd outing, a group of American and English girls flocked towards me. They had their final schooling in one of the many private colleges in the neighborhood and were looking for some fun. They liked my stories and made me talk a lot, which I gladly did. They also started bringing their own records. The girls were really nice to me. They considered me a bit young, something I really detested, but what can you do? So they told me all their thoughts. I learned a lot about girls in Paris. I'd mostly known little girls before and was now made privy of their emotional and physical secrets. We met after school, and sometimes I would drop by at lunchtime to see if I could invite some of them to an afternoon of fun in the park. We often ended up on Champ de Mars, because it was big and better equipped for visitors than the rather bare Invalides. There were more parties sitting around, and my music drew them closer. Police were not too happy with our exposure and would occasionally scuffle some latecomers off, though personally I never more than talked to them in my well-mannered voice, which I reserved for situations like these. One evening out, a mutual friend introduced me to Glenn Kidston, whose uncle by the same name had been a racer for the famous Bentley crew of the 1920s, before losing his life while flying a de Havilland over South Africa at the age of 32. Although such a pedigree would have interested me in anybody, I hit it off with Glenn, who was older than my brother Gareth, because we truly liked each other. Glenn, who was a regular visitor of Paris nightlife, introduced me to live jazz and marijuana. It was true, like he said, that jazz was much more interesting than rock and pop. It was an established music form the best musicians of the time had tried their hand at, whereas rock and pop were still very much in their early years. And it was equally true that the difference only grew when high on cannabis. I liked the stuff. Its effect was instant and lasting, and it didn't cause much of a hangover for the fun I got out of it. Nothing that a coffee and a cigarette couldn't cure. Glenn, who had been a good boy and gone through Eton, usually dressed in shades of black, complemented with dark sunglasses. He was what we called cool. And of course he fit in perfectly with the existentialist crowd, though he claimed his choice for black traced back to New York and the early days of bebop. Glenn turned out to be a real friend. We were level on many things, but whenever he felt the need to advise me, he wouldn't hesitate to do so, and always in that laid-back style of his, just quietly offering his 2 cents. And I quickly found out he could be fully trusted on his insights. Relations with Miguel did not improve, especially since now that the three of us were living much closer together, he felt the need to exercise some fatherly control over me, telling me to drink and smoke less and finally take life seriously. I wasn't quite sure whether it was his hypocrisy or my innate need to be free, but I hated him doing it and had some noisy disagreements over his behavior with him. Then Mummy Darling stepped in and in her own unique style sought a solution by buying Miguel a convertible Cadillac Eldorado, a gorgeous flash of a car literally no one else in Paris possessed. When Miguel one sunny Sunday suggested we take his baby for a ride, as much as I disliked the man, I accepted. I strictly went for the car, mind you, and made a mental note of not allowing him to warm up to me. As we were rounding Montparnasse on our way out of town, I said, "I've been driving a lot in Ireland, you know." "On Lugala, you mean?" "On the road. I drive rather well." Miguel snickered scornfully, a reaction I had calculated and managed with difficulty not to jump on. Instead, I turned on the inbuilt radio, and to my great fortune, Johnny B. Good blared into the air. I sang along loudly, and when the chorus came, I shouted over the traffic noise, "But he could drive that Eldorado just like ringing the bell." Miguel got the message and said, "Okay, you can drive a bit, but first we leave the city." Once on the road to Orléans, he stopped at a rest facility and handed me the wheel. "You are sure about this?" "I'll drive carefully." The Cadillac was fantastic. Though about the same weight and cylinder capacity, it drove much better than the Rolls at Lugala. The engine reacted more quickly, the brakes seemed stronger, and with its enormous size it swerved majestically on the rather direct wheel. It was perfect for overtaking the much slower French cars on the 3-lane road, the best invention the French have ever made. It was such a simple idea. Both sides kept to the right, and the middle lane was open to anyone in need of overtaking. Without the stream of cars opposite on a 2-lane road, you had many more overtaking opportunities and could go much faster. I soon began to occupy the middle lane continuously and only veered right when I saw an approaching car wanting to make a move. The Citroën DS was often my toughest opponent whenever it came to facing each other off. The Simcas, Renaults and Peugeots wouldn't take me on, but the beautiful DS sure would. Whenever I saw one approaching me, I really loved how the car floated through the air with the earth moving beneath its wheels. And there were quite a number of them. It was clearly a hit with people who could pay a bit more for their vehicle. Meanwhile, there was nobody like us, though there was an older American car, one of those round sedans from the early 50s. I waved and honked when we overtook them. You drive pretty well, Miguel had to admit, but you must go slower. You frighten people. I scampered. People need to wake up. You can't sit behind the wheel like a scared little mouse and expect others to take care of avoiding you. Everybody should drive well. It's not that difficult. Miguel laughed freely for the first time that day. And you driving so fast? You think that will teach them something? Naturellement. They see there's nothing to be afraid of. They could easily do a bit more themselves. Tara, your speed doctor. If that could be so. I wasn't really slowing down from a stop speed of 110 miles per hour, but I polished up my moves even more to obtain a film-like driving style, as if the other cars weren't really there, swerving from left to right and back again, sustained by the radio playing Ornette Coleman. Hamilton, who was my chauffeur when I was still too small to drive, told me to love cars as much as driving itself. That's nice, Miguel said, somewhat meaningless. I let the music play and went back to my driving. There is really nothing like fluent and fast driving for a gentleman's pastime. There have been many great drivers who pioneered beasts of machines that were impossible to drive and still reached respectable top speeds, making every corner dangerous. So many died, rich young men who dared their cars like horsemen their rides. Racing cars were better now. The new 60s model, flatter and with a lower seat than the cigar-like 50s models, offered hope for much better corner performance, making races both safer and faster, which is to say dangerous. Driving takes skill. You need to know what to do and how to do it in any given situation, so as not to get yourself and others in trouble. It also invites style for the reasons I have mentioned. You want to do it beautifully. You want to swerve and dance and play your machine like a musician would. At the age of 15, I honestly believed, or would like to believe, that engines had as much claim to personality as human beings, who I usually have in high esteem. To be honest, engines are more like dogs. You train them to your tune and you play them with your hands and feet. And the eyes, the all-important eyes that tell the body what to do. The brain is there only to control operations. It cannot tell the eyes what to see. Above a certain speed, you enter survival territory, and your reflexes will not allow you to have an opinion on what's happening in front of you. So if you want personal influence on the way your instincts drive, you need to practice a lot and carve through repetition trenches in your brain tissue, forcing thoughts to follow pre-shaped patterns. This ensures a minimum level of correct behavior even in moments of high stress, leaving it to your wits to steer you out of trouble. Of course, when circumstances are dire, your wits may abandon you. As they say, that's where you go wrong. On we went, past the flat and spacious crop fields north of Orléans, whose American look I began to enjoy. "Stop before we enter the city," said Miguel. "I don't want police looking at us." It was with pain in my heart that I stopped at a gas station on the edge of town, where I did the walk around the front, while Miguel slid over the bench, making it clear to everyone admiring our automobile that I had just been driving it. Miguel made up by taking me to a great restaurant where we had stew and sizzling hot oven potatoes. Miguel downed a bottle of red wine with stunning ease, and I had a glass as well. I'd have liked some more, but I soon realized that I was going to do most of the driving back, and if I played my cards well, I might even bring the Cadillac home. So I let my mother's husband do the drinking and bided my time, having cognac and a cigar with my coffee instead. It went as expected. Miguel drove us somewhat feebly out of town and soon started complaining how boring the agricultural lands were here. "Would you like to have a little nap?" I inquired. "Maybe, yes." We traded places, and Miguel almost immediately fell victim to the tenacious restaurant wine. His drunken snore was music to my ears. With the June sun glowing like a furnace in the afternoon sky, I put up the roof fully automatically, and soon it became almost unbearably hot on board. Of course, I opened the window at my side, but the Cadillac being the size it was, the fresh breeze would never reach Miguel, who was safely drowning in his alcoholic morass. It was quite busy all the way, and with Paris nearing, the number of cars on the road was growing steadily. The sun was throwing long shadows now, and some cars had begun shining their headlights. It was going to be dark soon, and the idea thrilled me somewhat. I had never seen very well in the dark. I trusted my instincts and knowledge of the surroundings, and at Lugala had often walked around with eyes closed, just so not to be bothered by my inadequate vision. Driving a car at night was a first, yet I wasn't going to wake Miguel out of his persistent slumber. I neatly folded into the right lane and let things follow its course. The road by now had become a dual carriageway, and we were going slower and slower until we inevitably came to a stop, moved again, and stopped another time. This was also my first ever traffic jam, and I immediately hated the feeling of being closed in, unable to use your car the way it was meant to be used. On the other hand, I learned that the car lights told you where everyone was and how fast they were going, and that driving in the dark wasn't half as bad as I had imagined. Paris was beautiful at night, that much was true, and participating in her chaotic traffic was a royal feeling. With my king-size automobile, I had to work that much harder to claim a sudden empty space. Yet at the same time, I commanded awe, which surely worked in my favor. Miguel had woken up by now. "Where are we?" "Almost home." "Are we in Paris?" He hit his head against the window in an unexpected move. "But you can't drive in Paris." "Relax, the car is dark, nobody sees us." That wasn't entirely true, as I was fully visible under the street lanterns at traffic lights. Yet there weren't any gendarmes peeping in, and we safely made it to Rue de l'Université. Miguel wanted to drink again, and I had certainly deserved a glass after my excellent drive, so I bothered Mummy Darling with an account of my adventures until she'd had enough and went to bed. I expected Miguel to join her, but he stayed, opening a fresh bottle. I said good night and went my own way. That was the closest we ever came to friendship, and it was all thanks to the car Mummy had bought him. From then on, I like to think I had tried and come to the understanding it was never going to work. Sorry, Miguel. Que pena.